it feels supernatural a lot of times, the things that happen when you're in the presence of horses, if you allow them to affect you. But I'm beginning to sense that much of what we might experience as supernatural is simply natural processes that the current paradigm hasn't embraced yet.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Reinforce the Horse. Today I'm here with Linda Kohanov, and Linda is an author, speaker, riding instructor, and horse trainer who has become an internationally recognized innovator in the field of equine experiential learning and a respected writer on the subject of equine facilitated psychotherapy. Linda, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. How are you, Elisa?
Doing so well, thank you. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you today about life and horses, and I'd like to jump right in and ask where your horsemanship journey began.
Well, it was a significant roundabout way because my parents were afraid of horses. So, as much as I wanted to have a horse, they weren't going to help me out with that one at all. And so, one of the crazy things I did as a child was through the woods, I would come up to the back of an old horse trader's farm. And in the back pasture, he really couldn't see me. And he had this transient herd of horses. They were ex-race horses. They were old horses that were being sent away. They were, you know, young horses that somebody bought and wanted to invest in or whatever. And so I would go back there and I would have this rapport with some of them that I would develop slowly over time because I didn't even have a halter or lead rope to interact with them. And so I would have to connect with them and lure the ones who were interested over to the fence, and I would crawl on their backs and just kind of mill around the pasture with them. And I also learned how to read horse body language. So some of the race horses were really flighty, and there were a few aggressive horses now and then. So my parents would have been much better off if they had gotten me riding lessons, but I had to keep that life a secret for quite a few years. And then when I moved to Tucson when I was in my 30s, it's really easy to keep a horse in Tucson. You don't have to have a barn. It doesn't get cold and snowy. There's really no mud. It's a lot of sand around, and you can just put up a horse shade and keep horses in your backyard if you have an acre or two. So I decided at a certain point, I was working in radio. I was a music critic and radio announcer and producer. And so when I would get off at noon, because I was their morning classical announcer, I would go to a local boarding stable where I had bought a horse and later had up to 3 horses at that particular boarding stable and started my horse journey there. It was really advantageous that I waited until I was an adult and had training in music and training as a music journalist and critic to interact with horses because I was able to pay attention to a lot of nonverbal and emotional information that horse owners at that time were generally ignoring. And so I was getting a new view of horses that I don't think I would have had. I think it would have been socialized out of me by the pretty extreme training situations that were going on when I was a child in the 60s and 70s. People didn't believe that horses had emotions at all. And they treated them like machines and vehicles for ego gratification. So coming into horses as an adult where I felt more empowered and had an ability to challenge the way that horses were being treated was advantageous for sure.
Wow, so you came into the horse world with this new sense of them being sentient beings and having a voice, if you will, more so than a lot of people that had been interacting with horses at that time. So,
Yes.
wow, that's incredible. So you've written a few books that dive into more your journey with horses, and I personally just started reading your Tao of Equus and just starting to read about your journey with Raza and how you found her. I'm curious to talk a little bit more about how your musical background helped in your journey with Raza and even the horses before she came into your life.
With music, you spend a lot of time playing in orchestras and chamber music groups and other different situations where you're getting together with people and you're actually engaged in a form of communication that's completely nonverbal. And you collaborate and you resonate and you harmonize. And so that was very helpful for me to have that background when I was working with horses. Also, emotion is part of the language of music. And using emotion as a language is what music is about to a great extent. And so I was used to paying attention to different emotional states and being able to portray different emotional states in music without becoming dysregulated by the emotions. So that when you're playing in a symphony orchestra, you experience joy and sadness and deep longing and, angry blasts from the brass section behind you, and so you have to actually be able to be in the emotional state and portray the emotional state without it dysregulating you, because if you get too angry or upset or frustrated at what you're conveying, and or you get too swept away on the wings of angels during a particularly blissful passage, the bow flies out of your hand and hits the conductor in the head and he falls off the podium and the whole thing comes to a crashing halt. So, being able to be centered in the midst of strong emotions was essential, but also the ability to use emotion as a language. And that's what horses do. And at that time in the 1990s, people were very skeptical. A lot of people, when my first book, The Tao of Equus, came out in 2001, um, there were people who got up and walked out of lectures and book signings when I was talking about the emotions of horses or the emotional or spiritual connection between humans and horses. They would get up and walk out. Now, since then, in 2012, we have the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness in Non-Human Animals, and that's been signed by major scientists throughout the world to say unequivocally that animals do have emotions, they have intention, they have a certain kind of agency in life, and that they are sentient beings. But when the Tao of Equus came out, many people were just so skeptical and just offended if you talked about horses being emotional or sentient beings. So that was really quite a journey to have that experience.
It sounds like a journey for sure. It's hard to believe now, talking to people about how horses and other animals have feelings, have emotions, and oftentimes it's such a like it's more of a common thing now than it was, say, back then. Like, I can't imagine existing in that state where people don't know and acknowledge that. I mean, I've had so many experiences with my horses where it's just like it's purely emotional and spiritual, and there are no words to explain that. Can you tell us a little bit more about the spirituality aspect of your horsemanship journey and how that also integrated into a connection with your horses?
Well, I've always been interested in philosophical and religious and spiritual insights and expanding consciousness. Horses across multiple cultures in myths are generally considered to be psychopomps. In other words, they can take people from this world into expanded states of consciousness, or as the Celtic people would call it, take you to the other world and then bring you back safely again. And that's part of myths of horses worldwide. And the thing is that these myths are actually true. In the presence of horses, they can alter your consciousness and also give you a sense that you're being accompanied into an expanded state of consciousness. So you're not alone. And they help ground you and bring you back again. And so once you have horses in your corner and you're open to the shifts in consciousness that they can facilitate, then the sky's the limit. the universe is the limit on where you can go.
Wow, that's powerful. That's There's a lot in that, and I feel that. I mean, you'd mentioned grounding, and horses, they're so grounded to the earth, and there's just an immense amount of like, yeah, they totally can take us to another world that's unworldly rather. Can you tell us about some of the experiences that you've shared with your horses speaking in this way?
Well, that's to a great extent what the Tao of Equus is about. And just last week, we released the revised and expanded edition of the Tao of Equus. So if you have read the original or you are reading the original, I highly recommend that you get the revised version. And it's out in stores and online services and things like that. So um, I'm making more sense out of the experiences that initially were in the original book that were filled with great mysteries. But now there is some research and even some scientific theories that helped us to understand things that I really couldn't justify with any kind of science back then. But that's what I've done in the new book is add some of that and also some deeper experiences that I've had. In some
Wow.
ways, I don't know if it feels supernatural a lot of times, the things that happen when you're in the presence of horses, if you allow them to affect you. But I'm beginning to sense that much of what we might experience as supernatural is simply natural processes that the current paradigm hasn't embraced yet. So I'll give you an example. I was sitting out in a field with my black Arabian mare Rasa. I would take her on walks in the desert. And then we would stop at certain places, especially if there was a patch of grass in the desert. I would just stop and hang out, sit with my back up against a rock or a tree, and I had a saddle pack, and I could pull out something to drink and maybe a book that I brought with me or a journal or whatever. And I would let Rasa loose, and she would eat up the grass. And one day I was just sitting there, and it was very warm. It was late spring in the desert, and well, it was probably near 100 degrees actually. I guess that's beyond warm. But I was just getting a little drowsy, and I kind of relaxed and closed my eyes for a moment. And I saw behind my eyes this like energy picture of the desert and the mountains exactly the way they were if I were to open my eyes. But when I closed my eyes, I saw this sort of scintillating picture behind my eyes that had this feeling of like living energy of all the grass and the trees and the mountains in the distance. It was kind of like pulsating. And it felt like I had gone into a serious altered state, but I was just out in the desert. I wasn't doing any substances of any kind. And one of the things that stood out was I could also see the image of Rasa standing there grazing, and then I could also see an image of a snake in the grass. And so I opened my eyes and I walked toward the area where the snake was in my vision, and there was indeed a snake just stretched out exactly the way I saw it in my vision, and he was kind of, sleeping. And so then I was able to just go over and put the halter on Rasa and just quietly lead her out of there without her accidentally stepping on the snake or me accidentally stepping on the snake. And I bring this up in the new version of the Tao of Equus because I believe that there are some scientific theories now that can explain this. And so Dr. Stephen Porges, who created the polyvagal theory, and I've really explored this theory deeply with Dr. Rebecca Bailey, who I work with in equine facilitated trauma informed therapy sessions. Um, he talks about neuroception. Dr. Porges talks about neuroception. And neuroception is completely unconscious. So perception would be conscious. And neuroception is your body as a tuner and receiver and amplifier for all kinds of information coming to you from the environment. Your body's like a tuner and receiver and amplifier for that. And so it was almost as if my body was picking up on the possible danger. I mean, Rebecca Bailey often says, the neuroception is like your internal TSA agent, like it's always picking up signs of safety or danger in the environment. And a lot of times for people, if they have their neuroception being engaged, they can just feel an intuitive hit that something's off or something's unsafe or something's safe. Can also give you that information, but it's usually a feeling. And I believe that what I was being shown that day is that the body can also send information to the brain to make it very clear about what its concern is. And so it was like my body was trying to make me conscious of exactly where the snake was so that I could actually avoid Rasa and I, and the snake perhaps, being hurt by our interaction.
That is that is powerful. I've never heard of an experience where it's like that vivid as the eyes are closed. And through the science that you're explaining, it seems like it's definitely been studied, and there are there is evidence to explain where this experience originated. It's incredible. Do you feel like that was like that is more of a or a channel of sorts from the divine, like expressing this safety for you, the snake and Rasa?
Yeah, and I think it's part of a divine design. I think we are designed. This design is in us, and through our particular socialization in a culture that has tried to wash the spiritual out of everything at times, and the emotional even, and sort of treat us all like machines so that we can be used for any purpose that any malevolent or benevolent leader might have. Our bodies are actually designed to give us all kinds of information, and there is a benevolence in nature as well. And that all comes from the fact that I have sensed a benevolent, intelligent, creative force in nature and the universe that many people would call God or the creator or the great mystery. But my experiences with Rasa and other horses that I've conveyed in the Tao of Equus in particular, and also my second book, Riding Between the Worlds, I talk about some really interesting mystical experiences where the horses themselves seem to have divine guidance, whether that would be that they have actual guides or they have a universal support that's there for them as a group and as individuals. So in the Tao of Equus, I talked about connecting with what I came to call the horse ancestors. And so that is, in some sense, it was conveyed to me when I was exploring what this force was as the wisdom that gives rise to the form of the horse. And so it is an intelligence that expresses itself through this particular species. There would theoretically be dog ancestors and mosquito ancestors and, certainly human ancestors where the memories and experiences of everybody who's lived before you are held in this field. But it also really feels like there's actual there are actual spirits of horses involved. So, for instance, I learned how to connect with the horse ancestors, and I do describe this in the Tao of Equus. It was a very strange experience. I actually thought I was crazy and went to an intuitive counselor who also had a PhD in psychology to help me with this. And this is how we discovered the horse ancestors. And I can also use it like as a translation device. So if I call in the horse ancestors, I can do it for a training dilemma, and I just connect with the horse ancestors, and then I can call a specific horse forward, like the spirit of a particular horse forward. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. In one, I had a man who who had read my book and wanted to connect with the horse ancestors and wanted me to connect with one of his horses who had passed on. And I don't consider myself like a conventional animal communicator. It's just there's a lot of things going on at once, but I'm not one of these people that claims to be, someone who immediately connects with the spirit of your horse. But in this case, I brought in the horse ancestors, and I connected with I just asked to connect with the horse of this man who had passed away. He called her by name. And I saw this vague image of a horse looking at me, and something was like really wrong with her left eye. And I said, yeah, I'm getting this interesting image, and the horse, her left eye, there's something really strange about her left eye. And he said, oh, she was blind in her left eye. So I did not know that ahead of time. And so this was the horse's way of showing that she really was connecting with us on the other side. And I've also used it for like training dilemmas. So I had this one guy come to me. It was a cowboy, and he had been doing all of the standard rodeo type stuff. And he had this horse that he had won a lot of rodeo events with, and this horse started acting crazier and crazier, and like rejecting him and being aggressive with him, seemingly out of the blue. And so he came to me, and I connected with the horse physically, but I also connected with the horse through the horse ancestors. And the horse just like looked at me, and I got this phrase, like this really angry phrase that said, "No more rustling. No more rustling." And I was like, it didn't make sense to me. I thought it was steer wrestling. I thought he was talking about wrestling steers. And and so I said, the horse just said this, no more wrestling. And I said, I guess he doesn't want to do want you to do steer wrestling. And he said, yeah, yeah. He looked kind of funny. But he said, yes, thank you. And then I found out a while later that he really was engaging in rustling horses. He was like taking animals in for training and then moving to another place and selling those horses. This is like, rustling is really the correct word, stealing. And so a lot of times when I get this intuitive information, or when others do too, it might take a while for it to make sense. Something similar happened when I was getting ready to move to we were looking for a larger ranch to create an equestrian conference center, which we were able to do in the mid 2000s, a place called Apache Springs Ranch. And one of my trainers, a phenomenal stallion trainer and high level dressage rider and a dressage judge, her name is Shelley Rosenberg. And she helped me with mating my horses and handling a very aggressive stallion I had named Midnight Merlin. In any case, she had this horse named Telluride, and she was going through my apprenticeship training program where she was learning how to work my methods for having horses work with teaching people advanced human development skills and also therapeutically. And so as a part of this advanced week of training, we had people learn how to interact with the horse ancestors and how to get information and all of that. And so she brought her horse Telluride out, and we all went out and got a sense of Telluride in person. And the reason why she brought him out is because he had been having some seizures. And the vet was telling her that she needed to put this horse down. And I said, well, before you put him down, why don't you bring him over? We have this class going, and why don't we just have the group get a reading on him? We're not going to tell anybody any of the issues that are going on with him. And then, if nothing else, maybe it'll help with his transition if you do have to put him down. So we did various in-person things with him, and then we connected with the horse ancestors, and then everybody got a different piece of information, and we were all sharing the information. And all of the information was unusually optimistic. And it all was focused on this horse being able to do this work of working in equine facilitated learning and therapy settings. And there was a feeling that these seizures were related to him being able to adjust his path away from a conventional. He was bred to be a dressage and hunter jumper type horse and show, and he was really valuable that way. And there was no way he was going to be able to be used in an equine facilitated learning program with that kind of breeding. And so the conclusion was that the seizures were related to him wanting to do his soul's work with people and step out of the show area. And so as a result of that, the last question we have the owner ask based on the information that's coming up is what question do you have based on this information? And so Shelley, rather than asking, is it time for you? Where would you, like to be buried or something like that? She just said, oh, well, yeah, let's ask him, where does he want to go from here? And so we reconnected with the horse ancestors, and people got various images. And one of the most striking images that didn't make sense at first was by this guy who was a social worker. He actually worked in the prison system in New York, and he was becoming one of our equine facilitated learning and therapy practitioners. And he was raised in New York City and was very skeptical of a lot of things. And he said, yeah, I just got a bunch of nonsense. And we just said, no, just tell us exactly what you got. And he said, okay, so I see this apple tree. I'm looking up in this apple tree, and Poseidon is in the apple tree, the god of the sea. But Poseidon is also in Greek mythology the one who invented the horse. He actually invented the horse to impress a woman, as it turned out. But so it was really interesting that Poseidon was up there. And he said, so Poseidon slides over an apple pie, and then I'm seeing fire trucks everywhere. And he said, that's it. That's all I saw. And so we couldn't make any sense of it, but we just wrote it down anyway. That's why it's important when you're getting intuitive information just to write it down, because the space associated with intuition is outside of time and space. So sometimes the information you're getting hasn't actually happened yet. So about 2 months later, we had looked at a bunch of different farms and ranches, and we were making an offer on Apache Springs Ranch. And during our period of due diligence, we had the building inspectors there, and I was there that day. And the owner of the property was touring us around, and she goes, yeah, look at these apple trees here, because we don't really have apple trees in the desert. So that in itself was unusual. And she says, and this one in particular, and we're looking up into its branches, she goes, this one makes incredible apple pies. And I was like, okay, that sounds familiar. And then a couple of days later, they were doing another building inspection, and I was there, and I got there, and we have a lot of wildfires in Arizona, and the entire mountain was on fire, and there were fire trucks going up and down the dirt road that Apache Springs was on. And so, in some sense, with that group of people, when Shelley asked her horse, Telluride, where do you want to go from here? Basically, the horse was saying, that place with the apple trees that make really good apple pies that's going to catch on fire in 2 months? I want to go there. So it was a magical moment. And so I think that a lot of times people expect when they're engaging in intuitive or spiritual sources of information that it should all make logical sense. But it's also like this. It's outside time and space, or you may not get to know exactly what's going on, such as the case with the guy who was doing basically rustling, stealing horses. And all I'm getting is this message from the horse that says no more rustling, and the guy wasn't about to tell me that he was stealing horses. I found out about that later when he got arrested by somebody, in some situations. So those are the kinds of weird things that can happen.
Wow, if that's not confirmation that horses are totally tapped in, I don't know what is. That sounds like such a profound experience. That's not the first experience that I've heard of like horses sort of telling the future, if you will. And that's like such an interesting, I have this, I guess, a theory that they're so tapped into all that is that they can tap into what will be, but they're also so present. It's like a paradox of, I don't even know how to explain it. Anyways, my mare painted a picture once, and once this painting got shipped off to its to its person now, it was a picture of this this woman, now a friend of mine, near a horse that she was working with. And it was such an interesting, I didn't catch that when I first saw the painting, but when she opened it up, she was like, oh my God, that's a picture of me and this horse that I just worked with. And so that's just another experience of a horse supposedly telling the future. It sounds like you've had some incredible experiences with them, and I'm in total awe right now. So you work in the realm of psychology, psychotherapy with horses. I'm
Well, actually, I mean, I personally, my emphasis is on equine facilitated learning and human development.
okay.
So, my main purpose is to teach advanced human development skills to people who already seem fairly well adjusted. But I
Wow.
also will do equine facilitated psychotherapy in collaboration with a therapist. And so I work a lot with Dr. Rebecca Bailey, and she and I created a modality called connection focused therapy. So there are times when I'm working in that realm, but I'm not a mental health professional myself. So I always make sure I have one with me, or there is a counselor who's encouraging this person to come and we are collaborating together.
Oh,
So,
that's beautiful. I wow, that's really cool. How did you decide that this is what you wanted to do for a career?
well, it happened progressively, and it was very foggy at first because that field didn't exist when I was working with horses in the mid 1990s. There was riding for persons with disabilities, which was really more about physical therapy, with people, doing therapeutic riding. And the field of equine facilitated mental health was just starting to even be, it wasn't even there yet. But I happened to be living in Tucson where I would connect with people who were like minded. And so, really, one of the founders of the Equine Facilitated Mental Health Association, that was created in the 1990s, Barbara Rector, lived here and she lived near me. And we would have these amazing conversations. And, I interviewed her she has a presence in the Dow of Equus. And so this was sort of on the horizon because what people were noticing is that yes, there were physical benefits to therapeutic riding, but that people seemed to be having deep emotionally healing experiences from the horses. And I also noticed that as I was working with horses over time, it was like they were tuning me to become a better adjusted person. And so I was seeing that the horses had this capacity to uplift people to be more functional in their lives and more creative and more courageous and more perceptive and more intuitive, more emotionally regulated. And so I just I just wanted to be able to offer a series of activities, which I eventually developed over time, that teach life skills and emotional intelligence skills and social intelligence skills and creativity and intuition and leadership skills, through working with horses. So that's basically what I do. And there's a lot of people out there that do equine facilitated therapy or learning, and their emphasis is having people have an experience that brings often some challenges and dysfunctions to light, and then based on that, then they start to problem solve about maybe what they can do different. And that's a component of what I do, but it's actually the real potential is progressive skill building. And so, there's a lot of particular skills that we teach through very specific activities that build on each other. And that's really my orientation in my business, Eponaquest Worldwide.
That's beautiful. It sounds wow. I'm so in awe by the work that you do and all of the beautiful, like, your messages that you've put out to the world. It's such an incredible You're such an incredible human being. I'm like honored to have you here and be speaking with you today. seriously.
Thank you. Well, I feel that
Wow.
about you too. I can tell. And it's so exciting that you and your father are on this journey together.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Dad, he's definitely he has a huge part in this as well. So thank you for acknowledging that. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Epona Quest came to be, particularly the name? I'm curious about the name behind it.
Well, when I wrote my first book, um, I had already created an organization. It was a collaborative organization of regional horse trainers, riding instructors, counselors, and educators. And I called it Epona Equestrian Services, named after the horse goddess, Epona. Epona is the Celtic horse goddess, and she's a goddess associated with healing and transformation and abundance. And so rather than just, name it after a person, and definitely not naming it after myself, like the Linda Kohanov method or something like that, I thought it would be better to draw on a wider source of wisdom and beauty and transformation by naming my business after Epona. And when I went to turn this into a worldwide organization, I decided to call it Epona Quest Worldwide, um, because it's like we're on a quest for what the goddess Epona as an archetype represents and wants to bring forth in the world. So that's where that comes from.
Wow, thank you. That's beautiful. Do you ever feel like you are able to tap into the energy of that goddess?
Well, yes, yeah. And also other equine archetypes like the mare-headed goddess Demeter. Wow, she's a powerful one. Whew. And in my book, where I have the horse wisdom cards, Way of the Horse, Equine Archetypes for Self-Discovery, I have a whole essay on the mare-headed goddess Demeter and how she teaches us how to work with trauma in a really deep and profound way. And so I feel a real affinity with her in particular. But there's this new book that came out in the last year or so, um, an in-depth study of Epona as the Celtic horse goddess, and a friend of mine sent it to me, and I'm in it. And this is written by a I wish I had the book nearby because I can't find it right now as we're sitting here sort of connected to our computers. But if you look up this book, and it's by a man who I think lives in England, and he was talking about how I would be a modern priestess of Epona. And I've never met him. He has never called me. I could have easily been called. I could have been interviewed, but just to have him say that. I mean, I don't know where he got that from. Maybe from reading the books. But so I guess I do have a somewhat recognized association with the goddess Epona. But she's not like a close friend that I sit down and have coffee with or anything like that. She's an archetype of inspiration and wisdom.
Fair enough. It's powerful. I feel like there's so much energy tied into these archetypes, these gods and goddesses that help create our reality, if you will. It's powerful. Can you tell us a little bit more about the horses in your work and how they help your clients?
Yes, it's really important to recognize them as individuals. So, not every horse is going to be oriented toward doing this kind of work. So that's one of the things I make sure is that when I bring in a new horse, I'm introducing them to the work. I'm making sure they have to experience it to understand what's really involved and see if they're into it or not, just like any of us. Like you can think you want to be an attorney, and then you sit in law school and realize, wow, I need to be a jazz musician. I got to get out of here. So it's the same thing with horses where they can seem amenable to this, but they need the experience to see if they like it. And we like to bring them in slowly and also draw on their unique talents and interests. So in my herd right now, I have several horses that are natural healers. They are really capable of being in the presence of somebody who has experienced trauma, who goes into fear, flight or fight modes really fast. They can feel really nervous and filled with anxiety. And these natural healing horses can help them regulate their nervous system and instantly help them calm down and feel safe. And they're very generous horses. They do not push boundaries with these people. They really take care of them. But we also have horses that are more assertive and opinionated, so to speak, from a human perspective. They're just asserting their own opinion about things. And so with those horses, you have to have more of a stronger sense of self and centeredness, or they just will kind of not really give you the time of day. They're like, yeah, you know, if you're not really committed to doing this and you're not in balance with yourself right now, come back and see me later because I have other things to do. But they're great at helping people learn how to tune themselves into that state. And it's a progressive state. And then I have several horses on the property who are sons of my stallion, Midnight Merlin, who's passed away a number of years ago. And these horses are actually naturally dominant and highly sensitive. And one of them is, I would say, truly an energetic genius. So he's like reading the energy of people, and he has people learn how to engage in energetic interactions with him that are really impressive. And it took me a while to understand that that's what he was doing. It was just so profound. His name is Indigo Moon, and also have some other horses who are really similar but also very dominant. So they're very strong. They can be very pushy. If you yield to them, this is the case with all dominant animals. If you yield to a dominant animal, including a naturally dominant human, they will take more liberties. So you have to be able to set boundaries with them, but do it in a way that it's not punishing or shaming, but it is about connection. And so to learn how to be strong and set boundaries with a horse who can be rather aggressive, while also showing them immediate positive feedback and connection when they make the slightest move to consider respecting you, this is an advanced move. So I have a progression of horses, some that are very gentle and help people and, can take care of people and are natural healers, and others that are more demanding, and then others that are really teaching you advanced empowerment skills that I don't think you could learn anywhere else except with a horse like that.
I love how all of the horses in the herd are different. Like everyone has their it seems like everyone has their strengths and weaknesses and their own sort of personalities, and it's really cool that they all are able to configure to a certain kind of person when they're working with them. That's really cool. Earlier, you mentioned your Oracle deck, the Way of the Horse. Can you tell us a little bit more about where the inspiration behind that deck came from?
Well, that's another weird synchronicity story with a little bit of a mystical twist. Um, I was up in Seattle. There's this amazing bookstore up there. I hope it's still there, called the East West Bookstore. It's like an amazing bookstore, but it also has like, you know, um, crystals and, you know, Tibetan gongs and things like that. And they also have this big area where they do have lectures going on. So it's not like when you lecture there that you're among the books. They really have a separate area with chairs because they do a lot of book signings and readings and meetings and things like that. So I invited the horse artist Kim McElroy to show her artwork at my book signing and lecture at the East West Bookstore because Kim lives in the Seattle area, and I had interviewed her and felt an affinity for her in the Tao of Equus. So you'll see that she's in that book. And so we met up, and we're in the East West Bookstore, and she's showing some of her paintings, and one of the people at East West Bookstore came up and said, you really should do a deck of like horse wisdom cards. And she was, I was kind of standing there off to the side, and I said, yeah, I was thinking that would be a cool idea, but I just really, you know, I'm not an artist, so I wasn't even thinking how you would pull something off like that, but it just kind of like fell in our laps. And Kim was like, yeah, maybe we should do a collaboration. I'll do the art and you do the writing. And so we were driving. She was also going with me I had to do another lecture in Olympia or something like that. And she was going to drive with me and also show her paintings at this experience. And the person at East West Books said, well, there's a lot of different kinds of cards now. You don't have to create cards to mimic the tarot. She said, for instance, there's this thing called the Fairy Oracle by David Froud. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but that's what it looks like when you see how it's spelled. And she said, why don't you buy the Fairy Oracle and take a look at that and really think about coming up with some kind of a horse wisdom deck. So Kim and I are like, we're driving across this huge bridge with this big overhang, I remember, and I opened she was driving, thank God. I'm not really good at driving in cities where I'm not used to being. And so I'm opening this card deck, and I noticed that there were like 60 cards in this deck. And I said to Kim, I have this really weird relationship with the number 54. It keeps showing up in spiritually significant situations. So let's ask the deck what it thinks about us doing a project together, um, based on choosing the card 54 and seeing what it means. And she said, yeah, let's do it. Why not? How fun. So I open the book and I find card 54, and the name of the card is Epona's Wild Daughter. So, that's some major synchronicity there to open up a card of fairies and then have the name Epona referenced. And I guess Epona's wild daughter, her name is Dorca, and she like pushes boundaries of things or something like that. I can't remember. I have it here. I could look it up, but yeah. So just all these weird things that sort of coalesce and come together, and wild synchronicities that support the work along the way and make things fun and kind of mysterious.
The universe and its confirmation sometimes. That is, wow. I'm amazed. So you asked the deck about about an idea that you had, and the deck totally just confirmed that this idea was a fantastic one, and you should do it. So now the deck is you've created the deck, and it is out there to the world, and it's all about the wisdom of horses. Is there any one or a few in particular that you maybe enjoyed writing about or creating more than the others, or a few that spoke to you more?
Well, I think we chose to have a deck of 40 cards, and then we were asked to revise the deck and add 2 cards. So it's now 42 cards if you buy the new version. Way of the Horse, Equine Archetypes for Self-Discovery. And some of the cards are related. Each card talks about a different lesson that horses are available to teach us. And some of these lessons are about relationship, and some are about emotional intelligence, and some are about equine archetypes of transformation. So it really is the full gamut of all these cards. And I think I just really enjoyed writing every single one of them, because they were all drawing attention to a different side of horse wisdom. And so, yeah, it's I can't say that there's anyone in particular. Some of my horses do show up prominently in certain essays. And so a lot of the paintings that we used to create these images in the cards were from Kim McElroy as a horse artist for years, and people commissioning her. She had lots of material, and she has a real flair for adding like a symbolic feeling to it, or an emotional feeling. And but we did commission 5 different cards for her to paint involving my horses. So I think those cards are really close to my heart. There's one called Merlin's Spirit, and it's a painting of my stallion Merlin with his son Spirit actually interacting, and that one's about the new hero's journey and reinvigorating a new form of masculinity that can really be nurturing and embracing, but also still very powerful and effective in the world. So that's one of my favorites. Um, there's also a card for Spirit. And Spirit is what Merlin's first son, and he was a twin born premature. His brother was stillborn. And in my book, Riding Between the Worlds, and in this Way of the Horse deck, there are some very spiritual elements and synchronistic elements that came to play in his story. So he really is about the twin forms of consciousness that can move between the worlds. And so that's where I talk about a lot of that.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So, yeah, a number of stories about horses that move me deeply are throughout that book. So it's really hard to pick one or two.
That makes total sense. I feel that for sure. I'm really excited to further dive into your books and the card deck, and man, this has been such a wonderful, inspiring conversation. Where can people find you?
Well, in a number of places. My main website is eponaquest.com. That's E-P as in Paul, O-N as in Nick, A-Q-U-E-S-T.com. And on that site, you can see workshops and sign up for our newsletter where you get updates on things that are happening. And also on that website, there's also a connection to another website where I've created a bunch of professionally produced online courses. And so that's at lindakohanov.com. But if you go to eponaquest.com, you'll see a place to click on that link and go directly to the online courses available. And there's actually an online course on there devoted to the Way of the Horse cards. And so that's a pretty quick and easy course to watch. It talks about how to do the layouts, what is the history of the cards. I actually have a camera over top of me where I'm doing a particular layout or two where you can actually see the cards as I'm talking about how you can interpret them and take a look at how the cards interact with each other to bring out new forms of meaning. So, and I also have a website devoted mostly to leadership based on my fifth book, The 5 Roles of a Master Herder, and that's masterherder.com. So 3 different websites, but if you go to eponaquest.com, you'll have access to that information.
Wonderful. And we'll go ahead and link these in our show notes for our listeners. Linda, do you have any last words of wisdom for our listeners today?
I think just the fact that you are doing this kind of a podcast, and other people are also doing incredible podcasts and conferences on horses and what they have to teach us and how we can treat them better and respect them more and delve into the emotional and spiritual side of the horse-human connection. This did not exist in the 1990s when I was writing the Tao of Equus. People just, if you went to there and you started talking about this stuff, people would like roll their eyes and start backing out of the room. So the fact that this has come forward at this level and you are sitting here with me today is just a true gift of feeling like, wow, the world really is changing. Horses are really stepping out and helping us shift things and come together in these beautiful new ways. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been such a wonderful conversation. You're such an inspiring individual. I'm so grateful for this time today, and thank you for sharing with us a bit more into your journey, and have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you so much.